A single grain of grain dust drifts through the air inside a forgotten grain. It moves slowly, almost weightless, carried by a current that no one notices. Beneath it, carved into the silence of early human storage, are thousands of seeds: wheat, barley, millet, collected not for abundance, but for survival against a world that never stopped taking. Outside, the wind presses against mud walls. Inside, something else begins to move. Not human. A shadow slips between sacks, pauses, listens. Its body is small enough to disappear into folds of darkness. Its eyes do not reflect light the way human eyes do. They collect it, absorb it, convert it into information. Every sound is measured. Every scent is mapped. Every breath of the world is calculated for risk. This is not a companion. Not yet. It is a wildcat. And at this moment in history, it is nothing more than a perfectly evolved suspicion. Most people imagine that cats came closer to humans because humans chose them. That is not what happened. The relationship began as something neither side agreed to. A slow, silent convergence shaped not by affection, but by grain, because where there is stored food, there is always something that wants it. And where there is something that wants it, there is always something that learns to hunt it. Thousands of years ago, early agricultural societies created a new ecological signal without understanding it. They built stillness where there had once been movement. They gathered abundance into fixed points. They unintentionally broadcast a message into the wild. This place never runs out, and the world responded. Rodents arrived first, not as intruders but as inevitability. They followed scent trails invisible to human perception, mapping civilizations through smell alone. To them, early human settlements were not homes. They were continuous seasons of opportunity. And behind them came something else, a predator that did not follow civilization. It followed the rodents. The wildcat, not a pet, not a symbol, not a myth, a biological correction. At first, humans did what humans always do when confronted with the invisible mechanics of survival. They noticed the effect before the cause. Grain disappeared less quickly in certain places. Storage pits near rock edges suffered fewer losses. Some granaries seemed untouched while others collapsed into ruin. The explanation was not yet language. It was pattern recognition without understanding. And in the margins of those patterns, a shape began to appear, a small feline form, moving like a thought that never fully commits to existence. Most wild animals avoid humans. This one simply avoided contact unless necessary, because the wildcat did not approach humanity out of trust. It approached because humans had already altered the geometry of survival. A new niche had opened, and nature never leaves empty space unfilled. The relationship began at distance. A cat watches a human from the edge of firelight. A human notices, eyes in the dark, but does not understand they are not watching them. But the rodents beneath them, two intelligences occupying the same space, interpreting entirely different realities. And yet, something unusual begins to happen. The wildcat does not flee as aggressively as wolves once did. It does not demand attention. It does not negotiate. It simply remains near the boundary. That boundary becomes the most important place in human cat history, because it is here, in this thin zone between fear and indifference, that evolution begins to shift shape. Humans do not domesticate the cat. They tolerate its presence. The cat does not domesticate humans. It exploits their byproduct. And somewhere between those two truths, something unprecedented begins to emerge, a mutual non-destruction, a silent contract written in behavior, not language. The research suggests this process unfolded over thousands of years without a single moment of intentional agreement. Archaeological evidence from early Near Eastern settlements shows feline remains buried near human structures, not as companions, but as peripheral participants in shared ecosystems. Scientists still debate when cats transition from wild predators to semi-domestic presence, but perhaps the question itself is wrong. Perhaps nothing ever truly transitioned. Perhaps the wildcat simply learned how to live beside a new kind of landscape, one that happened to be built by another species. And humanity, unknowingly, adapted in return. Because something strange begins to happen when predators stay near human food systems. Rodents decrease, food stores stabilize. Human survival improves, and the human mind, always quick to assign meaning to patterns it benefits from, begins to interpret this presence not as coincidence, but as protection. A creature that arrives silently, hunts what destroys your food, leaves without demand. Returns without permission. In later human civilizations, this pattern would be reinterpreted as mythology. But in its original form, it was simply ecology. Still, the most important transformation was not physical. It was psychological, because humans began to experience a subtle shift in perception. A predator that does not harm humans becomes something else entirely in the human mind. Not ally, not tool, something in between, a tolerated mystery, and mystery, in human cognition, is often the first step toward reverence. The wildcat did not change quickly. In fact, its evolution toward domesticity was shaped less by human intention and more by selective survival. Pressures created by proximity, the cats that tolerated humans survived longer near settlements. The cats that feared to strongly lost access to food-rich environments. The cats that adapted behaviorally, not physically, became the ancestors of something new. Not a new species. A new strategy, a new behavioral model of survival. Even today, domestic cats retain the architecture of their wild ancestors almost intact. Their hunting reflexes remain precise. Their territorial instincts remain sharp. Their emotional distance from humans remains partially preserved, as if domestication never fully completed the transformation, because it didn't. What humans call domestication in cats is, scientifically speaking, an incomplete negotiation, a partnership that never fully resolved into dependency. And this is where the story becomes more unsettling. Unlike dogs, who evolved through selection for cooperation, cats appear to have evolved through selection for tolerance, not obedience, not loyalty, tolerance, a fragile equilibrium where neither side fully controls the other. Humans provide shelter, warmth, and constant food-rich environments. Cats provide pest control, ecological stabilization, and an aesthetic presence that humans would later misinterpret as companionship. But beneath that exchange lies something quieter, a shared adaptation to proximity without integration. Over time, human brains begin to respond to cats differently than they respond to other animals. Researchers studying human-cat interaction patterns noticed something unexpected. The presence of cats triggers neurological responses similar to those activated by infant caregiving cues: small faces, large eyes, quiet movements, unpredictable behavior. The cat did not evolve these traits for humans. Humans evolved to interpret them in a specific way. The distortion is entirely one-sided and entirely human, and yet, this misinterpretation becomes the foundation of a global relationship. Civilizations rise and fall, but cats remain attached to human settlements across continents, not because they belong to humans, but because humans continuously rebuild the ecological conditions cats require. Cities become modern granaries, apartments become vertical ecosystems. Human civilization, without intending to, replicates the same conditions that first attracted wildcats thousands of years ago. Abundance. Heat. Shelter. Rodents. The pattern never disappears. It only scales, and the cat remains exactly where it began, at the boundary. Watching. Measuring. Waiting. There is a deeper tension here that most narratives avoid, because if cats were truly domesticated in the same way as other animals, they would have become dependent instead. They retained escape, the ability to leave, the ability to revert, the ability to become wild again with minimal genetic cost. This is not typical domestication. It is coexistence without surrender, a parallel existence running alongside humanity, never fully merging with it. And perhaps that is why cats feel psychologically different to humans compared to other animals. They do not ask for belonging, they allow it to be offered but never finalized. Even today, when a cat enters a human home, it behaves as if the space is not given, but evaluated. Not owned. Assessed. as though every room is still part of a larger wilderness that humans only temporarily occupy, and in that subtle reversal, something quietly destabilizing becomes visible. Humanity did not fully bring cats into civilization. Cats brought themselves into human civilization and refused to be absorbed by it. This is not companionship in the traditional sense. It is cohabitation between two species that never resolve their boundaries, a system held together not by trust, but by functional convenience, and yet, emotionally, humans interpret it differently. We see affection where there is tolerance. We see loyalty where there is habit. We see intimacy where there is proximity, but the cat remains unreadable in the most fundamental way. It does not reflect human social structure back at us. It reflects survival. And survival, stripped of narrative, feels almost like silence over time. That silence becomes familiar. And familiarity becomes attachment, and attachment becomes culture. But beneath culture, the original truth remains unchanged. A wild predator once entered human space not to join it, not to serve it, not to understand it, but because human space accidentally became part of its ecosystem, and humanity, in response, built meaning around the encounter. Mythologies of sacred cats in Egypt. Superstitions of protection and misfortune. Modern homes where cats are treated as family, even while remaining fundamentally ungoverned. Every interpretation layered over the same underlying reality. A species that never stopped being wild simply learned how to exist where wildness was no longer visible. And perhaps the most unsettling realization is this: cats were never created by humans, they were shaped by what humans could not control. By what humans accidentally produced in the environment around themselves. By grain. By storage. By unintended abundance. By the invisible architecture of civilization itself. And so, when a cat sits silently in a corner of a modern room, watching without urgency, there is a deeper continuity at work, one that stretches back to the first granary, the first rodent, the first shadow moving between sacks. Not a story of domestication, but a story of parallel survival. Two intelligences sharing space, neither fully understood by the other, neither fully willing to leave, and in that unresolved distance, humanity does not merely see a pet. It sees something older. Something that chose not to leave when everything else changed, and perhaps that is the quiet contradiction at the heart of it all. Cats did not become human companions, they became witnesses to human civilization. And they never stopped being wild enough to remind us that civilization was never the only world happening at the same time. I'm